But in the time of Ross Perot, there was a unifying figure. I mean, Ross Perot himself. Now you don't have a figure. I mean, because, as you know, the candidates supported by Sarah Palin fared rather bad.
Well, I think that the one unifying figure that they have is possibly Sarah Palin. And the question is whether or not where that's going to lead them is something that I think that only time will tell.
So you don't see a post-Palin populist movement in the United States?
Well,
you are not seeing other Sarah Palins coming?
I think what happens
maybe more structured and more...
I think a lot depends upon how the economy performs. I think that if the American... And I think that part of the problem is that no one understood how deep the problem was at the beginning of this administration. I think it was a much bigger problem than anyone thought.
We're talking about the economy.
The economy. It required doing many, many things and so in the end, really the answer was the political response was, you could be a lot worse off than you are, which is not a very good political message in a campaign.
No, it looks like a Russian joke.
So what happens is that you find yourself in a situation where you're sort of doing all the things you need to do. You're being responsible. And actually, I think the other way to look at it is this. The bailout that was done for the banks and for AIG and all those types of things that were very unpopular, they were done by people who believed, both parties, that they had to be done. And what happened, though, is it was so antithetical to American values, which was that these people would be out there, they'd be working, or basically they were creating the problem. Yeah. They've created this huge problem. And now here comes the government and somehow rewards them and saves them. So what happened was, it was one of these sort of dichotomies. People are acting responsibly, as they should do, because that was the way out. But it was so antithetical that Americans just I think that was the basis of so much of this anger.
Which happened, of course, everywhere else in the Western world. It wasn't just in America.
But in terms of bailing out the banks and the way it was done, even though if you look at TARP today, it turned out to be a relatively decent investment, but symbolically and from a value standpoint, I think that created a lot of anger among Americans that they never really got past. And so
I see lots of discussions in Portugal where people say, look at the United States, they were tough against corrupt bankers. I mean, they put Bernie Madoff in jail. I mean, they didn't let him go.
You know.
Some people here say that you were
one guy
tough.
Well, no, and I understand something. I think that in many ways we were. I think what happened, though, is that a decision was made that we needed to maintain the financial system that we had, which meant that we needed to maintain some of the institutions that we had. And some of those institutions' behavior was not particularly good. And so I think that for many Americans, it was just, it just rubbed them wrong. When the bailout of General Motors, for example, it rubbed them wrong. Now, a decision was made which was 2 million more people would have been out of work if you'd let it go. Yes. But it was not something that was very popular.
Yes, and the alternative would have been the conceivable collapse of the whole financial system.
But again, you're back to the argument, which is things could be a lot worse, which is not a very good political argument.
Ex-President Bush went to a big talk show in the States and he said that his heart bleeds because of not finding weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And it's curious that the ex-director of budget for President Bush was elected in these elections. I mean, do you see any chance of the Bush family returning to politics in the next few years or months?
Well, you look, in every government you have many people who serve different roles. And when you work inside of a White House or you work at a high level in the United States government these days, unfortunately, it's a very difficult job. You're working 7 days a week, you're working 15 hours a day, and along the way, if you've worked this and you've done it well, regardless of whether others agree or disagree with some of the policies, oftentimes very talented people, it takes a very talented person to do the job. And so I would expect to see a number of these people. You have Mitch Daniels, who I believe was the budget director at one point, and Rob Portman, who was just elected to the Senate that you referred to. I would imagine there are a number of people who played key roles in various administrations to step out and run for elective office. Because I think when you've been an appointed official and you're watching, you're thinking, if I had a chance to do it myself, if I were the elected official, I'll bet I could do it better.
Let me just ask you about the story that we're on, which is basically the results of the midterm elections. Reagan, Clinton, and we go back further, they all presumably probably had reversals of this type. Certainly, I remember Reagan did, Clinton did. They still functioned. So to an extent, are we looking too excessively at our navels in saying, will President Obama be able to function?
Well, of course.
The fact is that the system does function.
What happens is this, is one of the strengths of America is that our institutions continue to function regardless of the circumstances. The best example, of course, in my lifetime, was the resignation of President Nixon. that what happened is here you have the head of government who's been popularly elected, within 2 years is leaving office, and it was just moving right along. So in other words, we are fortunate that we have a system of government that absorbs these things, absorbs the punches, if you will, and keeps on moving. I think that President Obama, look, he still runs the executive branch of government. The Democrats still control the Senate. They have a minority in the House, but they still have probably, when all is said and done, a couple hundred votes in the House. So what you're dealing with here is a president with substantial political power, but he also has, and what a president always has, is the so-called bully pulpit. The president has the loudest megaphone in America.
So you don't anticipate that his image abroad, and we're on the eve of President Obama coming here to Lisbon for a NATO summit and him going to the G20 meeting, you don't anticipate that his image abroad will have been weakened or shaken by these results?
No, I think what will happen is that everyone, because it's our nature, the foreign leaders will start reading the tea leaves to see, what does it really mean.
Of course.
I suspect they will find a very similar person that they dealt with before, and I think that he will be as resolute as he always has been.
But you don't think there is the risk of what we can call the Gorbachev factor, when Gorbachev was more popular outside of Russia than inside of Russia? I mean, don't you think that
I think frankly that's pretty common for American presidents. Somewhere in the administration, it really is.
British prime ministers, French presidents.
I mean, Clinton clearly went through that phenomenon at one point, and yet he's very popular today. I think that there may have been an exception or two, but clearly that as far as the world is concerned, I think that most of the world, certainly in Europe, they've embraced President Obama as someone who is inclusive in his message about what we need to be doing in the world.
And do you see any chance of the new majority and some Democrats will ask for maybe a change also at the top? Because I see lots of Democrats now saying maybe it's a good idea for Obama only to have one mandate.
I think what happens is that you have after an election, when your party loses, there are a lot of people who are running around looking for some sort of a magic bullet, if you will, that somehow solve the problem. The reality is that President Obama, while he's has not made any formal announcements, I would fully anticipate running for a second term, and I would fully anticipate, likelihood being reelected.
Let me ask you a final question on foreign affairs. It's not really on foreign affairs. The Americans, and it's being interpreted, and I think legitimately so, as some disenchantment with President Obama, and therefore voted the way they voted. In 2009, he was given the Nobel Peace Prize. Do you think he's deserved it so far?
Well, I think that
foreign policy.
Well, I think two things. I think that he was given the Peace Prize because he changed the tone of the way the United States was viewed in the world. And I think within the context for what he was given the prize for, that he has succeeded.
But the world hasn't changed, really, has it? The Middle East is still the same mess that's always been.
I think, first, I would argue with you that the Middle East, that at least we are much more engaged in an effort to do something in the Middle East than perhaps we've been for a long time. Now, whether or not we'll be successful is, if it were easy, it would have happened long ago. So it's clearly difficult. We clearly are more engaged, or attempted to be more engaged with Iran. As it relates to their nuclear situation than we were in the past. So I think that, yes, that the president, and the other thing is I think the United States is actively pursuing a multilateral approach to problems in the world, much more so than they have in a while. So I think that within the context of what they gave it for, he has succeeded.
Well, Ambassador, our time is up, unfortunately. Thank you for having us here.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it. I hope to see you all soon. Right.